I think you'd have an interesting research perspective here. What do you think are the key factors holding back scientific progress globally?
I think the entire Vannevar Bush thing of centralizing research around and after the time of World War II has run its course. And so I think the fundamental thing holding back scientific progress globally is the choke point that is the US government. And what I mean by that is, you'll often see people say, oh, basic research has to be federally funded. What about, the internet and the human genome and so on and so forth? And it is true that there's been some, great stuff that's come out of what I'd call the centralized, research establishment. But Bastiat has this concept of seen and unseen. And there's this concept also of crowding out. So all of these funds that were appropriated and centralized with the federal government, all the research that was centralized there's a certain school of thought that comes where it's, grants and it's papers. There's choke points that happen. And if you've seen, there's a graph that Collison has posted that I've also posted a while ago, which shows that the same cohort that started receiving NIH grants has basically just aged like roughly 1 year per. Do you know the graph I'm talking about? You might be able to show it. Okay.
I've seen it.
It's, NIH, let's see if I can find it. NIH grant recipients. Yeah, here it is. It's kind of like, it's this. This gives a concept. So if you go into that and you scroll down a little bit, do you see the fiscal year, the blue and the red thing there, right? Basically, as the years go by, that mode of the bell curve just shifts over roughly 1 year at a time. And so it's like the same cohort of people who are on each other's grant committees that are awarding themselves stuff. And they're just sort of aging with it. It's a very political, centralized process that is ossifying, along with much of the rest of Western civilization, where you see, Top Gun Infinity, you see, like 70, sometimes 80-year-old politicians. Patrick Collison actually had this tweet just a little while ago. Let me see if I can find it, which shows that this is the case for movies. This is the case for, here we are.
We'll put these links in the show notes for anyone listening on audio.
Yeah, here you go. So take a look at that one. See that? Look at those two graphics. And the first one shows that movies with leads, less than 30 years old were very common in the 90s and the 2000s. They're incredibly uncommon today. And now 60-year-old, why is that? Because people are like, oh, remember when America was better? And, they want Tom Cruise, they want, these proven stars, but those guys are aging. You go to the next graphic and you can just see the age of NIH investigators has dropped off. And that saying which is it's like science advances one funeral at a time, if you've heard that. It's very obviously it's very cynical, but it's also true in the sense that often things are not, the old guard doesn't want to retract something or want to give in, but when they're no longer there to fight it, then there can be progress that's made, and so to your question, that centralization, the one thing that happens is you'll get people like, Mariana Mazzucato or others who will say, oh, all innovation is due to the state. And, what about DARPA? Why don't you give thanks to the great glory of the state for, taking and taxing all the money from you and then dribbling a little bit back to you in the form of research dollars, right? And the thing about this is, if you go a little further back, obviously, much of mathematics and physics was discovered before NSF existed. Maxwell's equations was not NSF funded. And neither was Newton. There are, if you go further back in time, in fact, thermodynamics and statistical mechanics came out of experiments and the empiricism of steam engines. The engineering drove the science, and there's these huge industries of railroads and aviation and automobiles, which obviously involve quite a lot of science, but also a lot of engineering, that managed to arise without something like the kind of federal research establishment that we have. I'm not saying there wasn't some federal funding for railroads and stuff like that, but fundamentally the thing was more decentralized. The reputation system was decentralized, the funding system was decentralized. You had the time the so-called gentleman science, where people would get independently wealthy and they would tinker and putter around with stuff and they'd publish sort of for each other, right? Now today that actually is sort of coming back with open source, with the fact that people can putter and they can try things out and they can share their results online, and they can even do so pseudonymously. And it's not just gentlemen, but it's gentlewomen and gentle pseudonym science. like the project-evidence.github.io or Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper. Those are things which, while they're now very highly cited, at least certainly the Satoshi Nakamoto Bitcoin white paper is very highly cited in traditional academia. It's probably not the kind of thing that you could easily get published in traditional academia because it spans so many disciplines. It's not thought of as a good concept, but you could put it out on the internet. And project-evidence.github.io, that's now almost conventional wisdom. I tweeted about this in March, April 2020, which was basically evidence for lab leak thesis when that was highly, controversial. Oh my God, conspiracy theory. Now it's almost conventional wisdom, right? Now that basically, it's politically useful, it is almost conventional wisdom, but it's not so much that the facts have changed. The trail in some ways has gone colder. So to your question, the key factor is centralization, and that might have actually had some benefits. Okay, in some sense during that period, that may have also been in a sense inevitable. 1950 was arguably peak centralization. I talk about this in the Network State book. You had one telephone company and two superpowers and three television stations, or rather, you had AT&T, right? You had the U.S. and the USSR. So one telephone company, AT&T, two superpowers, the U.S. and USSR, three television stations, CBS, ABC, NBC. That was highly and aberrantly centralized. You had these massive empires, the Soviet Empire, the Chinese, like everything had just massively centralized into these gigastates, and really under the US and the USSR. And then the third world was, those parts that weren't, or some of them were actually actively fought over, but they were not combatants themselves. And this degree of centralization was actually very atypical if you go backwards and forwards in time. So this whole thing of the centralized scientific infrastructure that we think of as just a fact of nature actually arose within living memory. It might be older people, but it's, if you're 80 something years old, you were around before this whole thing was basically set up. And so we need to actually not just get rid of that, we need to transition away from it gradually and transition into something else. And so then that gets to, I think, your next question.